Chapter 2: Data and Sampling Distributions. A popular misconception holds that the era of big data means the end of a need for sampling. And in fact, the proliferation of data of varying quality and relevance reinforces the need for sampling as a tool to work efficiently with a variety of data and to minimize bias. Even in a big data project, predictive models are typically developed and piloted with samples. Samples are also used in tests of various sorts, e.g. pricing, web treatments. Figure 2-1 shows a schematic that underpins the concepts in this chapter. The left-hand side represents a population that, in statistics, is assumed to follow an underlying but unknown distribution. The only thing available is the sample data and its empirical distribution shown on the right-hand side. To get from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, a sampling procedure is used, represented by dashed arrows. Traditional statistics focus very much on the left-hand side, using theory based on strong assumptions about the population. Modern statistics has moved to the right-hand side, where such assumptions are not needed. In general, data scientists need not worry about the theoretical nature of the left-hand side, and instead should focus on the sampling procedures and the data at hand. There are some notable exceptions. Sometimes data is generated from a physical process that can be modeled. The simplest example is flipping a coin. This follows a binomial distribution. Any real-life binomial situation, buy or don't buy, fraud or no fraud, click or no click, can be modeled effectively by a coin, with modified probability of landing heads, of course. In these cases, we can gain additional insight by using our understanding of the population. Random sampling and sample bias. A sample is a subset of data from a larger dataset. Statisticians call this larger dataset the population. A population in statistics is not the same thing as in biology. It is a large, defined, but sometimes theoretical or imaginary set of data. Key terms for random sampling. Sample, a subset from a larger dataset. Population, the larger dataset or idea of a dataset. N, or lowercase n, the size of the population, open parentheses, sample, close parentheses. Random sampling, drawing elements into a sample at random. Stratified sampling, dividing the population into strata and randomly sampling from each strata. Simple random sample. The sample that results from random sampling without stratifying the population. Sample bias, a sample that misrepresents the population. Random sampling is a process in which each available member of the population being sampled has an equal chance of being chosen for the sample at each draw. The sample that results is called a simple random sample. Sampling can be done with a replacement in which observations are put back in the population after each draw for possible future reselection. Or it can be done without replacement, in which case observations, when selected, are unavailable for future draws. Data quality often matters more than data quantity when making an estimate or a model based on a sample. Data quality in data science involves completeness, consistency of format, cleanliness, and accuracy of individual data points. Statistics adds the notion of representativeness. A classic example is a literary digest poll of 1936 that predicted a victory of Al Landon against Franklin Roosevelt. The Literary Digest, a leading periodical of the day, polled its entire subscriber base, plus additional lists of individuals, a total of over 10 million, and predicted a landslide victory for Landon. George Gallup, founder of the Gallup poll, conducted bi-weekly polls of just 2,000 and accurately predicted a Roosevelt victory. The difference lay in the selection of those polled. The Literary Digest opted for quantity, paying little attention to the method of selection. They ended up polling those with relatively high socioeconomic status, their own subscribers, plus those who, by virtue of owning luxuries like telephones and automobiles, appeared in marketers' lists. The result was sample bias. That is, the sample was different in some meaningful, non-random way from the larger population it was meant to represent. The term non-random is important. Hardly any sample, including random samples, will be exactly representative of the population. Sample bias occurs when the difference is meaningful and can be expected to continue for the other samples drawn in the same way as the first. Now we have a boxed in little blurb. Self-selection sampling bias. The reviews of restaurants, hotels, cafes, and so on that you read on social media sites like Yelp are prone to bias because the people submitting them are not randomly selected. Rather, they themselves have taken the initiative to write. This leads to self-selection bias. The people motivated to write reviews may be those who had poor experiences, may have an association with the establishment, or may simply be a different type of person from those who do not write reviews. Note that while self-selection samples can be unreliable indicators of the true state of affairs, they may be more reliable in simply comparing one establishment to a similar one. The same self-selection bias might apply to each. Bias. Statistical bias refers to measurement or sampling errors that are systematic and produced by the measurement or sampling process. An important distinction should be made between errors due to random chance and errors due to bias. Consider the physical process of a gun shooting at a target. It will not hit the absolute center of the target every time, or even much at all. An unbiased process will produce error, but it is random and does not tend strongly in any direction. See Figure 2-2. The results shown in Figure 2-3 show a biased process. There is still random error in both the X and Y direction, but there is also a bias. Shots tend to fall in the upper right quadrant. Bias comes in different forms and may be observable or invisible when a result does suggest bias, i.e. or e.g. by reference to a benchmark or actual values. It is often an indicator that a statistical or machine learning model has been misspecified, or an important variable left out. Random selection. To avoid the problem of sample bias that led the Literary Digest to predict London over Roosevelt, George Gallup opted for more scientifically chosen methods to achieve a sample that was representative of the US voter. There are now a variety of methods to achieve representativeness, but at the heart of it, all of them, lies random sampling. Random sampling is not always easy. Proper definition of an accessible population is key. Suppose we want to generate a representative profile of customers, and we need to conduct a pilot customer survey. The survey needs to be representative, but is labor intensive. First, we need to define who a customer is. We might select all customer records where purchase amount is greater than 0. Do we include all past customers? Do we include refunds, internal test purchases, or sellers, both billing agent and customer? Next, we need to specify a sampling procedure. It might be, quote, select 100 customers at random, end quote. Where a sampling from a flow is involved, e.g. real-time customer transactions or web visitors, timing considerations may be important, e.g. a web visitor at 10 a.m. on a weekday may be different from a web visitor at 10 p.m. on a weekend. In stratified sampling, the population is divided up into strata, and random samples are taken from each stratum. Political pollsters might seek to learn the electoral preferences of whites, blacks, and Hispanics. A simple random sample taken from the population would yield too few blacks and Hispanics, so those strata could be overweighted in stratified sampling to yield equivalent sample sizes. Size versus quality. When the size matter. In the era of big data, it is sometimes surprising that smaller is better. Time and effort spent on random sampling not only reduce bias, but also allow greater attention to data exploration and data quality. For example, missing data and outliers may contain useful information. It might be prohibitively expensive to track down missing values or evaluate outliers in millions of records, but doing so in a sample of several thousand records may be feasible. Data plotting and manual inspection bog down if there is too much data. So when are massive amounts of data needed? The classic scenario for the value of big data is when the data is not only big but sparse as well. Consider the search queries received by Google, where columns are terms, rows are individual search queries, and cell values are either 0 or 1, depending on whether a query contains a term. The goal is to determine the best predicted search destination for a given query. There are over 150,000 words in the English language, and Google processes over 1 trillion queries per year. This yields a huge matrix, the vast majority of whose entries are 0. This is a true big data problem. Only when such enormous quantities of data are accumulated can effective search results be returned for most queries. And the more data accumulates, the better the results. For popular search terms, this is not such a problem. Effective data can be found fairly quickly for the handful of extremely popular topics trending at a particular time. The real value of modern search technology lies in the ability to return detailed and useful results for a huge variety of search queries, including those that occur only with a frequency, say, of 1 in a million. Consider the search phrase Ricky Ricardo and Little Red Riding Hood. In the early days of the internet, this query would probably have returned results on Ricky Ricardo, the band leader, the television show I Love Lucy, in which he starred, and the children's story Little Red Riding Hood. Now that trillions of search queries have accumulated, this search query returns exact I Love Lucy episode in which Ricky narrates, in dramatic fashion, the Little Red Riding Hood story to his infant son in a comic mix of English and Spanish. Keep in mind that the number of actual pertinent records, ones in which this exact search query or something very similar appears, together with information on what link people ultimately clicked on, might need only be in the thousands to be effective. However, many trillions of data points are needed in order to obtain these pertinent records. And random sampling, of course, will not help.